Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Gravitas, presented by Amity University, ranked amongst the top 3% universities globally. Skoda, superb, best in next class. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist.
And it's not even been 3 weeks since Joe Biden took oath of office. He's begun outlining his foreign policy. There are no surprises there, a few shifts, yes, and none of the drama of Donald Trump. How should the world look at this? Experience, we know, brings stability and policy continuity, which is very important in foreign policy as well. It also spells lack of game-changing ideas. It's too early to add any of these tags to the Biden White House, but the world knows one thing. The US president has to clear up the mess at home first before dictating terms to the world. America's allies are watching his moves and they say that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Countries like India are also picking up the hints that are coming from Washington. On Gravitas tonight, we'll discuss what Joe Biden as president brings to the table and if the post-US era has truly arrived. That's what the Supreme Leader of Iran has declared. Also on the show this Monday, Foreign Destructive Ideology, FDI. The Prime Minister of India has coined a new term. A state in India wants to probe pro-government tweets. Finally ending, or is it worsening? The UK variant of the Wuhan virus is spreading. Some experts say this year may be worse than the last. Queen Elizabeth, Britain's longest reigning monarch, influenced the law to hide her wealth. A new revelation has cast another shadow on the royals. And the Prime Minister of Israel is being called the crime minister as he makes a court appearance in a very damaging corruption case just weeks before an election. We'll discuss all of this. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
In the first reported use of force against anti-coup protesters, Myanmar security forces fired water cannons on the demonstrators who were taken to the streets against the removal and detention of elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Myanmar's military leaders issued a warning through state television aimed at the protesters, saying lawless wrongdoers must be prevented or removed. At least 18 people have lost their lives and more than 200 are still missing in the northern Indian state of Uttarakhand after a piece of a Himalayan glacier fell into a river, causing a torrent that tore through 2 power plants and swept away roads and bridges. An operation has been launched to rescue around 30 people trapped inside a tunnel. India has donated 500,000 coronavirus vaccine doses to Afghanistan. The vaccines were handed over to the Afghanistan acting public health minister in a ceremony at the Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul on Sunday. India has sent hundreds of thousands of vaccine doses to other neighboring countries, including Sri Lanka, Myanmar and Nepal. Australian citizen Cheng Li, who worked for Chinese state television channel CGTN, has been formally arrested in China on suspicion of illegally sharing state secrets overseas. Li was detained in August 2020. The arrest was made on February 5th after 6 months of detention, according to the Australian Foreign Minister. The government of India has sent a notice to Twitter asking it to suspend or block 1,178 accounts spreading misinformation on the farmers' protests. These accounts were flagged by security agencies as accounts of Khalistan sympathizers or backed by Pakistan. The Netherlands has declared a rare code red emergency for the entire country, as it witnessed its first major snowstorm in over 10 years. Authorities have closed the COVID-19 testing sites to avoid further chaos. Dozens of flights were delayed or cancelled at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. Health officials in Congo confirmed another Ebola outbreak in the country's east on Sunday, the fourth in less than 3 years. On February 3rd, a woman died in Butembo town in North Kivu province after having symptoms of the disease. The government has started tracing everyone who came in contact with her. Swathes of East and Southeast England were covered in snow by Storm Darcy over the weekend, forcing the closure of vaccination centres in some areas. Authorities have issued severe weather warnings as the cold weather is expected to last until the end of the week. The year's first tennis Grand Slam is underway, and the big guns have made emphatic starts at the Australian Open. Defending champion Novak Djokovic hit 41 winners and made just 11 unforced errors in a straight sets victory over Jeremy Chardy. Over in the women's draw, US Open champion Naomi Osaka thrashed Russia's Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova 6-1, 6-2, while Serena Williams began her quest for an eighth title in Melbourne with a 6-1, 6-1 drubbing of German Laura Siegemund. Tom Brady has furthered his legend as the greatest NFL quarterback of all time by leading underdogs Tampa Bay Buccaneers to glory in Super Bowl 55 with a 31-9 rout of defending champions Kansas City Chiefs. The 43-year-old threw 3 touchdowns and completed 21 of 29 passes as the Buccaneers rallied from a 3-0 deficit for a runaway victory. Brady was named MVP for a record 5th time and has now won 7 Super Bowl titles, 3 more than any other quarterback in history.
The world likes Joe Biden, but it is losing faith in America. I'm not saying this, the world is. These are the findings of a poll conducted in 12 countries in December 2020. These are the countries: Brazil, France, Germany, Japan, Kenya, India, Indonesia, Mexico, South Africa, Turkey, and the United States. Respondents in all these countries say that they support Joe Biden, but they do not trust America's ability to deliver. Another poll was conducted in Europe. They found that Biden's popularity or acceptability is undermined by pessimism against the US, surrounding the US. Europeans believe the US political system is broken and that the world cannot rely on Washington to protect its allies. Has America lost its global leadership position then? Are we living in a post-US era? Tonight on Gravitas, we look at where America stands on the world stage and what Joe Biden is doing to reclaim Washington's place, and whether it will be enough. Let's start with how Biden is reshaping America's foreign policy on China, on India, on Iran, and on Saudi Arabia. Recent decisions and statements offer some clues on Biden's thinking. They also offer insights into the problems that Biden is not thinking about. Problems like Afghanistan. No clear statement on America's longest ever war there. For the moment, let's talk about the countries that he has discussed, starting with China. Joe Biden wants to remain tough on China. Recently, the US president gave his first interview as president. This is how he describes Chinese President Xi Jinping.
He's very bright. He's very tough. He doesn't have, and I don't mean as a criticism, just a reality, he doesn't have a democratic small d bone in his body. But he is, the question is, I've said to him all along, that we need not have a conflict, but there's going to be extreme competition. And I'm not going to do it the way that he knows this.
Two takeaways from that statement. One, that America is not looking for a conflict with China, but it does fear, quote-unquote, extreme competition, whatever that means. And number two, America wants to stop China from forcing its authoritarianism on the world. The question is, how do you do that with a country like China without a conflict? Well, America's new Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has said something similar to the president. He had his first call with his counterpart in China, and it wasn't a pleasant one. Blinken was quite straightforward, we are told. He told China that the US will hold Beijing accountable for its abuses in the international system and for its efforts to threaten stability in the Indo-Pacific. During the call, Blinken said that the US wants to raise issues of human rights in Xinjiang, Tibet and Hong Kong. He pressed China to condemn the military coup in Myanmar. Obviously, Beijing won't take any of this lying down, so it blamed America for the breakdown in their relationship and asked it to, quote-unquote, strictly follow the one China policy on Hong Kong, Xinjiang and Tibet. Not surprisingly, China also refused to recognize the Indo-Pacific. The Chinese statement uses the phrase Asia-Pacific instead, which brings me to India. Where does Team Biden stand on India? The American president did not mention India in his speech last week when he talked about foreign policy, when he talked about allies. No word on India. But the Biden administration has dropped some hints, mostly on the Quad, the quadrilateral alliance of India, the US, Japan and Australia. They're called the Quad. Now, reports say the US has proposed a Quad summit, an online meeting with the leaders of Australia, Japan and India. America's National Security Advisor Jack Sullivan issued a statement last week. He said the Quad is, and I'm quoting, fundamental, a foundation upon which to build substantial American policy in the Indo-Pacific region. So New Delhi has something to look forward to here, but it must also prepare for scrutiny, especially on the issue of the farmer protests. We'll tell you more about it in just a bit. For the moment, let's discuss Iran. The sanctions will not be lifted. That's the bad news for Iran. President Biden has sent a clear message to Tehran. It will have to comply with the terms of the 2015 nuclear deal first. Iran will have to stop the enrichment of uranium before the talks begin. So for now, Biden is keeping the Trump-era sanctions on Iran. What is Tehran's response? Iran's leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has rejected Biden's demand.
If they want Iran to return to its JCPOA commitments, America must completely lift sanctions, and not just in words or on paper. They must be lifted in action, and then we will verify and see if they have properly been lifted, and then return to these JCPOA commitments. This is the Islamic Republic's definite policy.
Khamenei followed up those words with this tweet. He declared the post-US era has started. This is a clear message to Washington. Khamenei wants the US to come to the table first. West Asia remains a quagmire for America, and Biden's first steps on Saudi Arabia won't make his job any easier. Last week, Joe Biden put Saudi Arabia on notice. He declared the war in Yemen a quote-unquote humanitarian and strategic catastrophe. He withdrew America's support on the Saudi-led coalition. What does this mean? The US will no longer support the Saudi offensive in Yemen, an end to the military aid, curbs on weapon supplies. Reports say the US could cut off supplies of munitions and spare parts to Saudi Arabia, stop maintaining the aircraft of the Saudi Air Force, and limit sharing military advice. The United States has also moved to delist the Houthi rebels in Yemen as a terrorist organization. Saudi Arabia has led a military intervention against the Houthis since 2015. And this is quite a shake-up after Trump's very successful peace deals between the Arabs and the Israelis. So what do these decisions tell us? What should we make of Joe Biden's foreign policy? Too soon to tell. For most governments, Biden is a predictable, conventional president. Unlike Trump, who could sometimes pull a rabbit out of a hat and some other times talk through his hat. Here's something else that's worth noting. For decades, the United States of America dominated the world politically, diplomatically, economically, culturally, scientifically, you name it. America's influence was unmatched in every way possible. It was called the most powerful nation since Imperial Rome, one that was stronger than any likely combination of other nations. The world's tallest buildings were in the US. The world's biggest factories were American. So was the biggest movie industry, the best healthcare system, the best law and order. Cut to 2021. Now, and America's share in the global pie is much smaller. The playing field has leveled. The tallest buildings are in Dubai. The biggest factories are Chinese. The biggest movie industry is Indian. America's healthcare system is in a sorry state, as India is vaccinating the world. There's a breakdown of law and order in the US. France is fighting extremism. America is grappling with political unrest and racial divide. The US now looks similar to the countries it once tried to liberate. It is no longer in a position to impose its views, its interests, and its values on the world. So has the post-American era truly arrived? This report explores.
America is back. I'm running as a proud
Not really.
Democrat.
The world order has changed since the Democrats were last in power. And there are too many challenges at home for the Biden administration to take a lead on global issues.
Those who do. We will act on the first day of my presidency to get COVID under control.
America remains the worst hit nation due to COVID-19.
And we'll act to restore our faith.
27 million cases and counting. Over 460,000 deaths and counting. Schools are yet to reopen in many states. Vaccines are sitting idle in minority communities, and the UK variant is spreading rapidly. A new study says the mutated virus is doubling every 10 days and could become America's dominant strain by March, potentially driving up the number of cases and causing more deaths. American politics is beyond the point of repair. The Republicans are rallying behind Trump, dismissing the impeachment as a waste of time. The Democrats have not wavered. They will not rest until Trump is convicted.
Some are already demanding that we move on.
This ceaseless political war is hampering legislation. The Republicans say their freedoms are being taken away.
We have Nancy Pelosi leading the Democrats in Congress to do whatever they want. They don't care what Republicans have to say. They don't care about what our districts and our voters have to say. They only care about pushing their socialist agenda through. They only care about taking away our freedoms. That's not right.
America is broken not just politically but also socially. Americans have become deeply distrustful of one another. They disagree with each other's beliefs, policies, and plans. We're not saying this, surveys are. In a poll conducted by the Associated Press, 85% of registered voters described Americans as being deeply divided in their values. Only 15% said that democracy was working. In yet another poll conducted by CBS News in January this year, 54% said that the biggest threat to America wasn't economic collapse, natural disasters, or foreign interference, but America's own citizens. This difference in ideologies reflects in the racial divide. Yes, Joe Biden is promising to make America diverse again, but it will take time to undo the impact of Donald Trump's presidency. According to Kaiser Health News analysis, the vaccination rates among Black Americans are significantly lower than that of white Americans. In Indiana, 85.8% of the vaccinated population is white, only 4% are blacks. In Tennessee, 68.15% are whites, whereas 6.7% are blacks. And in Florida, 63.7% are whites, only 4.9% are blacks. Researchers blame limited access and mistreatment of the black community in healthcare for this disparity.
America is back. America is back.
America is far from being back. It is in a state of decline. Joe Biden will have to clean the mess in his own backyard first, before he embarks on his self-righteous promise of making the world better. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
And while we discuss the post-American era, we must also look at how India's ties with America will shape up, or are shaping up. How much of a shift are we seeing in the Biden presidency from the Trump administration? Is there a shift at all? And what do American policies and statements mean for New Delhi? Let me begin by addressing the elephant in the room, India's internal affairs. Ever since Joe Biden came to power, it has become fashionable for some to claim that the Indian government will face some pushback on its internal matters. But is America really in a position to do so? The simple answer is no, it isn't. Joe Biden is a seasoned politician. He knows better than offending India. The Indian diaspora in the US has become quite affluent and influential. Indian Americans funded Biden's campaign, and now at least 20 Indian Americans are part of the White House team. Also, the geopolitical realities have changed since the Obama era. Today, India is a leading global force. It enjoys a strong bipartisan support across the world. India sits at the high table of the United Nations Security Council. In fact, just 3 days back, New Delhi played a key role in shaping the UNSC statement on Myanmar, on the coup. To add to that, India's vaccine diplomacy spreads as far as Latin America. New Delhi is nursing countries like Brazil and Mexico. There's a congruence of interests on the diplomatic front. India and the US are on the same page when it comes to Taiwan and China. India is America's strategic counter to Chinese aggression. The Quad countries, as we told you, are already arranging a meeting of their leaders with an eye on China. India is the only Quad member that shares a land border with China and operates outside of US security-led alliances. So let me say this. America would think twice before interfering in India's internal affairs, just as India has steered clear of interfering in America's. That's how it works. That said, there is no guarantee that Joe Biden will be as tough on China as Donald Trump said he was. It could be mere political compulsion, given the kind of narrative that Trump had built in the last 4 years. Like I said, Biden is a seasoned politician. He is likely to seek more avenues of cooperation than actively stoke more conflicts with China, something that he suggested in his first diplomatic address as well.
We'll confront China's economic abuses, counter its aggressive, coercive action to push back on China's attack on human rights, intellectual property, and global governance. But we are ready to work with Beijing when it's in America's interest to do so.
We are ready to work with Beijing when it's in America's interest to do so. What do we make of this? That Joe Biden won't deal with China like Donald Trump did. In his back pocket, he has a long-standing relationship with Xi Jinping. In a recent interview, Biden also noted that he had spent more time with Xi than most world leaders. He said, and I'm quoting, "I had 24 to 25 hours of private meetings with him when I was vice president. Traveled 17,000 miles with him. I know him pretty well." All I'm trying to say is that India's relationship with America hinges strongly on how Joe Biden deals with China. Then we come to Russia. What about it? CAATSA, C-A-A-T-S-A, the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. That's what it's called, CAATSA. It's basically a law. It's a law aimed at pushing back Russian influence. Now, under this law, the United States has sanctioned Turkey for buying the S-400 missile defense system from Russia. Now, you would remember that India too has ordered the same S-400 systems from Russia. In fact, India is Russia's largest defense customer. The Trump administration limited itself to expressing displeasure over this relationship. Will Joe Biden do the same, or will he use CAATSA against India, which is also a major potential defense buyer for the US and a clear strategic partner? There's no guarantee which way he'll swing, although he cannot really afford to irk New Delhi with sanctions at this point. The bottom line is this: the current geopolitical chessboard is very complex and India has strategically positioned itself in this game. The Biden administration will have to find a way to work with India. The odd statements to appease Biden's domestic vote bank notwithstanding. Which brings us to what happened in New Delhi today. A new term was coined in the Indian Parliament, a new connotation to the abbreviation FDI. We've always known of FDI as foreign direct investment. Today it was called Foreign Destructive Ideology, FDI, something India has been receiving a lot of late. This was Prime Minister Narendra Modi's assertion as he addressed the Rajya Sabha, the upper house of India's parliament. He took a direct aim at foreign forces attempting to influence India and the foreign destructive ideology being deployed to harm the country. He also said that Indians must safeguard themselves against it.
मैं चीज देख रहा हूं, देश प्रगति कर रहा है, हम एफडीआई की बात कर रहे हैं, फॉरेन डायरेक्ट इन्वेस्टमेंट, लेकिन मैं देख रहा हूं इन दिनों एक नया एफडीआई मैदान में आया है. ये नए एफडीआई से देश को बचाना चाहिए. एफडीआई चाहिए, फॉरेन डायरेक्ट इन्वेस्टमेंट, लेकिन ये जो नया एफडीआई नजर का आ रहा है, ये नए एफडीआई से जरूर बचना होगा. और ये नया एफडीआई है फॉरेन डिस्ट्रक्टिव आइडियोलॉजी. फॉरेन डिस्ट्रक्टिव आइडियोलॉजी. और इसलिए इस एफडीआई से देश को बचाने के लिए हमने और जागरूक रहने की जरूरत है.
The Prime Minister's remarks come in the backdrop of the farmer protests in India. Just days after the so-called Greta leaks, I'm sure most of you are aware of this, climate activist Greta Thunberg recently shared a document on her Twitter profile, then deleted it. It was a toolkit and a very detailed one. It was for people across the world on how to contribute to undermine the farm laws passed by the Indian Parliament. Now, some say the fact that the Indian Prime Minister himself had to raise it could be a cause of worry. The statement also comes after reports that Pakistan is trying to hijack the farmer protests on social media, mostly on Twitter. The government of India has identified at least 1,178 Twitter accounts. These accounts are allegedly amplifying misinformation about the farmer protests in India. The list comprises accounts belonging to Khalistani sympathizers operating on Pakistani soil. It also includes automated chatbots that are pushing their agenda. The government says these accounts are a threat to public order and has asked Twitter to block them. Last we checked, Twitter was yet to comply with the government order. A Twitter spokesperson issued a statement saying, and I'm quoting, "If the content violates Twitter's rules, the content will be removed from the service. If it is determined to be illegal in a particular jurisdiction but not in violation of Twitter rules, we may withhold access to the content in the location only." And that's only part of the Twitter story. Here's the second part. This one is about the tweets that support India and the government stand. The government of the state of Maharashtra wants to investigate such tweets. You heard that right. They want to probe tweets that support the Indian government on social media. This state is led by a party called the Shiv Sena, which also happens to be a former ally of the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP. Now, the Shiv Sena government in the state of Maharashtra wants to investigate if Indian celebrities were under pressure to tweet in favor of the Indian government on the farmer protests. The Home Minister of Maharashtra, Anil Deshmukh, has said that the State Intelligence Department will investigate the matter, highlighting how tweets issued by some celebrities were similar. This may be the first such case of tweets favouring a policy being probed. The controversy is set to get bigger. What can we say? Indian Twitter beats Alice's Wonderland. Israel, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in court today, his corruption trial has resumed after multiple delays. These proceedings will have a huge impact on Israel's upcoming elections, the fourth one in 2 years, the fourth election in 2 years. Inside the courtroom, Netanyahu appeared calm and collected, but the scenes outside must have unsettled him. Our next report tells you what's in store for Israel's longest-serving leader.
6 weeks to go before Israel's fourth snap polls, and the campaigns are off to a sluggish start. There are no rallies due to the Wuhan virus pandemic. As for the Prime Minister, he was on court for his corruption trial. Clad in a surgical mask, Benjamin Netanyahu seemed conscious of his demeanor. He wanted to project a business-as-usual attitude. He stayed for 20 minutes, denied all charges against him, and left without any explanation. Netanyahu faces charges of bribery and fraud. He allegedly accepted lavish gifts from rich friends and repaid them with favors. The Prime Minister denies everything. He says it's all part of a left-wing witch hunt. Netanyahu was indicted in May last year, the first Israeli Prime Minister to be formally charged. At his first court hearing, Netanyahu appeared defiant, delivering a strong speech before entering the courtroom. This time around, he was a lot more measured, urging his supporters not to gather in light of the pandemic. Inside, the affairs were more of a formality. Netanyahu pleaded not guilty before staging an abrupt exit. The message was clear. The trial would not affect his administrative responsibilities. Outside the courtroom, the scenes were quite different. Dozens of protesters gathered with blow horns and placards, the most prominent of which read Crime Minister. Protests demanding the PM's ouster have become a weekly affair in Israel.
I believe that this court is just the first stage. Netanyahu has additional cases that we are fighting to open. This is the first stage, but the big case is the submarine case, and we believe that in this week we will receive the Supreme Court decision to open the investigation of the submarine case, and this will be the bomb that will blow the whole thing.
But what impact will this legal drama have on the elections? The chances of a quick resolution are thin. In all likelihood, this case will drag on for years unless Netanyahu wins the election in March. With a new mandate, he could push for parliamentary immunity or pass laws that excuse incumbent prime ministers from facing trial. When Israel goes to polls for a fourth time in 2 years, there's a lot more than just the premiership at stake for Netanyahu. As Prime Minister, he can battle the charges from a position of strength. As a private citizen, the legal hurdles may appear taller. To make matters even more dramatic, opinion polls show both sides in a dead heat this March. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Is the Wuhan virus pandemic ending, or is it growing bigger? Well, it remains an uphill battle even after the vaccines. That's because the virus is mutating again, and there are growing fears that the vaccines may not work against these mutations. South Africa, for instance, has halted the rollout of the Oxford vaccine. Why? Because it may not work against a more contagious variant of the Wuhan virus. And the bad news does not end there. Scientists in South Africa claim that those who were infected before may not be immune to this new mutation. Now, this is a major blow for South Africa. This country has recorded close to 1.5 million cases and more than 45,000 deaths. But what does this development mean for the Oxford vaccine? This shot is being administered in India too, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Does it not work? Should the world stop using it? And are all vaccines ineffective against a mutating virus? We'll try and take these questions one by one. First of all, is the Oxford vaccine ineffective? Well, in this case, honestly, it's too soon to tell. The sample size of the study conducted in South Africa is too small, and most of the participants are young. It is impossible to declare a verdict on the Oxford shot right now. South Africa's health minister has himself admitted they need to carry out more tests to be sure.
And we are uncertain about the impact of the vaccine that it will have on hospitalization, severe diseases and death. This means that what we will take from Professor Shabir Madhi is that some more work needs to be done on this issue, because the results from other countries have been quite satisfactory, but there are issues in South Africa that we need to study a bit more.
What about the rest of the vaccines? Will these mutations make them ineffective? Scientists across the world are just beginning to understand these mutations, and they believe the vaccines will not entirely be ineffective. They might be modified to work with the new variants, and those who've taken the vaccines might need a booster shot. In the United Kingdom, scientists are already working on booster shots. They might need them soon because the mutations are growing by numbers. The UK faces the risk of becoming a melting pot. Reports say 3 different variants of the Wuhan virus are now circulating in the United Kingdom. 3 variants, and they all have a mutation called E484K, a mutation that could undermine immunity from previous infections and current vaccines. This, by the way, is not the first mutation of the Wuhan virus. It certainly won't be the last. There have been at least 4,000 mutations of this virus, 4,000. Does that mean the pandemic will never end? There is no magic bullet, yes. Countries can only hope to make incremental progress. The only way to keep fighting this virus is to keep adapting to its changes. The silver lining here is that most vaccine makers say they're able, or they will be able, to adapt their shots for the variants and push out better variants of vaccines in a matter of weeks. It's a race. Experts believe that one may need yearly vaccination to combat the virus, just like how flu shots work. So scientists will have to keep testing the vaccines at every turn. And in such a situation, vaccine data is going to be vital. Which brings us back to China, because the Chinese vaccine makers have not provided vaccine data yet. A report now claims that China forced Nepal to take its vaccines even when the efficacy was under question. Apparently, the Chinese embassy in Kathmandu wanted Nepal to accept Sinovac. The Nepal government is yet to give permission to the Chinese vaccines, but China will reportedly provide 500,000 doses. Nepal has already kicked off its mass vaccination drive with Indian vaccines. Last month, India provided 1 million shots of the Oxford vaccine to Kathmandu. In the meantime, there's been growing skepticism against the Chinese shots, not just in Nepal, the world over. Last week, French President Emmanuel Macron had this warning for countries that are banking on Chinese vaccines.
I have absolutely no information about the Chinese one. I will not comment, but this is matter of fact. What it means is that on the mid to long run, it is almost sure that if this vaccine is not appropriate, it will facilitate the emergence of new variants. It will absolutely not fix the situation of these countries.
The fight against the Wuhan virus may get tougher as the virus mutates, leading to more infections. And it is an unpredictable virus, but the world can certainly get its guard up against unreliable vaccines. For more than half a century, Queen Elizabeth II has been at the centre of British society. 13 prime ministers have come and gone in her reign, 1-3. Her family has been hit by countless scandals, but the Queen remains unscathed. One reason is that she stays away from politics. She lets politicians make policy and govern. Or at least that's what Britons were led to believe for the longest time. A new report has found that the Queen actively lobbied against a legislation in 1973. What for? Because it would have exposed her immense financial wealth. What's even more worrying is that the government yielded to her demands. Our next report has all the details.
Queen Elizabeth II, Britain's longest ruling monarch. Her reign began in 1952. and has encompassed 2 successive centuries. During this period, empires collapsed, dictators were toppled, and a superpower imploded. But through it all, Queen Elizabeth II has survived. Her playbook is simple: stay in the shadows of power.
The government will embark on an ambitious program of domestic reform.
Never intervene in government affairs. Play the role of a glorified yes-man. For this, the public adores her, the non-interfering monarch. But a new report has revealed that this may not have always been the case. The year is 1973. Edward Heath's government is mulling a new proposal, one that would force front companies to reveal the identity of their clients. As is tradition, the Queen is informed, but the royal household soon realized there was a problem. The Queen herself owned front companies. She used them to hide her enormous wealth. How much? No one knows, but it is estimated to run into hundreds of millions of pounds. If the law was enacted, the Queen's front companies would have been forced to reveal her identity. To avoid this, she broke the most sacred principle of constitutional monarchy. She interfered in governance, not directly, but through her personal lawyer, a certain Matthew Farrer, who relayed the Queen's concerns to the government. Documents from the National Archive detailed the correspondence. The Queen was concerned that her private investments would be published, that the scale of her wealth would become common knowledge. The solution, according to the lawyer, was to exempt her from the law's purview. But this presented a new problem. If the exemption was granted to only one person, it would make identifying the Queen's holdings quite easy. It would be the odd one out. So Edward Heath's government devised a workaround. Exemptions were granted to a whole class of investors: heads of state, heads of government, central bank functionaries, and such. But this was just a technical eyewash. In practice, the new clause was intended for one person, the Queen of England. The draft bill remained on the shelf for 3 more years. Then, in 1976, Harold Wilson's Labour government enacted it. Very few changes were made to the original version. Most importantly, the Queen's secrecy clause was retained. Among the first to receive the exemption was Bank of England Nominees Limited. On paper, it was operated by senior officials at Britain's central bank, but word on the street was that it was the Queen's front company. 4 years ago, the company shut down. As for its holdings, that's still a mystery. Monarchies already appear out of place in modern society. Episodes like this further erode trust in them. Republicans are banging at the gates of Buckingham Palace. This could be the evidence that sways public opinion in their favor. Bureau Report, WION. World is one.
Let's turn our focus to Haiti. It's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and on Sunday, the Haitian government claimed that they had foiled an attempt to overthrow the president, Jovenel Moïse. Authorities said 23 people have been arrested for plotting to overthrow and kill the president. Haiti has already been mired in violence. Rampant kidnappings and killings have terrorized its citizens for months now. And the people now say that they've had enough. Here's a report.
Kidnappings, rampant crime, a crippled economy. Life in Haiti is the opposite of normal, which is why the country has been locked in anti-government protests for most of last year. But things are not improving. They may only get worse. Haiti is hurtling towards a constitutional crisis. The opposition wants President Jovenel Moïse to step down They say his 5-year term ended on Sunday, but the president has refused to vacate office and claims that his term ends next year.
I'm not a dictator. Dictators are people who take power and don't know when they're leaving. I know my mandate ends on 7th February 2022.
Haiti's powerful neighbor, the United States, has supported Moise's claim and said that a newly elected president should succeed Moise. But tensions came to a head on Sunday. The government announced a failed coup. Over 20 people were arrested, including a Supreme Court judge and one of Haiti's police general inspectors. Protests erupted. Demonstrators clashed with police in at least 3 different cities. The protesters have one demand: the president must resign.
Today, we do not recognize Jovenel Moise as president because his mandate is over. According to the Constitution in its Article 134(2) and the Electoral Law in its Article 195, Jovenel's mandate is over.
The dispute over when Moise's term ends stems from his original election. He was voted into office in 2015. The poll was later cancelled on grounds of fraud. He was re-elected in 2016, but sworn into office only in February 2017. As for the president's dictatorial tendencies, the opposition has a strong argument. Moise has led by presidential decree since last year. He has suspended 2/3 of the Senate and the entire lower chamber of deputies and every mayor in the country. Haiti now has only 11 elected officials in office to represent its 11 million people. The president also seeks to expand his powers in the coming months by changing the country's constitution. A referendum is scheduled for April. The opposition fears the vote will not be free or fair. Meanwhile, it's Haiti's citizens who suffer. Its already failing economy has been made worse due to the pandemic. The political uncertainty may lead to violence. Haiti is bracing for a long period of unrest. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
That we're slipping into a short break. Up next, Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.
WION now available in the United States. Download the app now.
One World Trade Center, that is the one where the impact.
The cause of India's freedom for many years.